like my snakeskin said. I'm on the outside.
It is estimated that we need about 500 milligrams or 6 grams of sodium daily for vital functions. But did you know that on average working age adults in England consume 8.4 grams a day, that's 40% above the national guidelines. In Sri Lanka, the National Population Salt Consumption Survey estimated the salt intake of a person, including all sources of salt, as 10.5 grams per day. Eating this amount of salt daily in your curries can lead to high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. It can also cause calcium losses, some of which may be pulled from the bone. Furthermore, to give additional taste, fried salted dry fish is a must to enjoy your plate of rice and curry. The more curries you consume with your rice, the more salt is being consumed. Salt intake in China is confirmed to be among the highest in the world, with adults over past 4 decades consistently consuming an average about 10 grams of salt a day, which is more than twice the recommended limit, according to new research. Excessive salt intake has been shown to be the main cause of hypertension, and salt reductions efforts have been implemented worldwide. In Japan, where both salt intake and the prevalence of hypertension are high, reduction in salt intake have been stalled since 2014 and remain high at 10.9 grams per day for men and 9.3 grams per day for women as of 2019. The low mortality in Japan is mainly attributable to a low rate of obesity, low consumption of red meat, and high consumption of fish and plant foods such as soybeans and tea. In Japan, the obesity rate is low, 4.8% for men and 3.7% for women. Is adding salt to food good for you? Adding moderate amounts of salt to food for taste is acceptable, but excessive amounts of salt should be discouraged as the child's taste preferences are formed early, and large quantities of sodium may lead to high blood pressure later in life. So it's a good idea to train children to avoid unnecessary salt. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 2,300 milligrams a day and move towards an ideal limit of no more than 1,500 milligrams per day for most adults. Salt is used in unlimited amounts in the production of processed foods. Salt is perhaps most well known for its role as a flavoring agent and as a food preservative in both home cooking and food processing. When making yeast pieces of bread, the amount of salt greatly affects the final texture of the bread. Salt alters the structure of the proteins and the interactions of proteins with other components, example water, fat, and proteins, which impacts the texture of the foods. Eating too much bread, you tend to eat a lot of excess salt. When salt is added to processed meats, it restructures the proteins, which then act as a binding and emulsifying agent. The new protein structure helps to hold the product together and helps to prevent moisture and fat loss. Processed meat is associated with cheaper, greasier, and fattier meats. However, processed meat can also be high in salt, an ingredient many have forgotten about. It is well known that consuming too much salt can increase the risk of high blood pressure But many of us mistakenly believe that we do not eat a lot of salt. The reality is that we are often not in control of how much salt we consume, as the majority of the salt is already in the food we buy from supermarkets, cafes, and restaurants. In fact, 75% of our total salt intake comes from the food we buy. As a result, we are currently consuming 8 grams of salt per day, more than 6 grams maximum recommended intake. Today, most families do not cook their food. Instead, they buy pre-cooked, ready-made processed foods from the supermarkets for convenience. People would not know the large amount of salt they consume in these foods. How does increased salt consumption affect your blood pressure? A high salt diet disrupts the natural sodium balance in the body. This causes fluid retention, which increases the pressure exerted by the blood against blood vessel walls, causing high blood pressure. The harm of eating excess salt can affect your blood pressure. Within 30 minutes. Your blood vessels' ability to dilate is impaired. High blood pressure is a major risk factor for heart attack, stroke, and heart failure. So keep tabs on your sodium, especially if you have high blood pressure or heart disease or are at risk of developing them. On the other hand, what happens if you do not eat salt for a week? In severe cases, low sodium levels in the body can lead to muscle cramps, nausea, vomiting, and dizziness. Eventually, a lack of salt can lead to shock, coma, and death. Severe salt loss is very unlikely to happen because our diets contain more than enough salt. Too much salt consumption can cause osteoporosis. Salt is a major factor in controlling the amount of calcium in the urine and loss from the bones. Because calcium is important for bone strength, too much salt can lead to bone weakening and therefore osteoporosis. The main point is that higher sodium intake raises urine calcium. The mechanisms are essential in that the way the nephrons get rid of salt forces them to lose calcium more or less in due proportion. Eating too much salt comes with long-term health consequences including high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, and kidney stones. So, the advice to restrict your salt intake must be taken seriously, and the reasons have been detailed. Hope this video article was useful. Stay safe and goodbye for now.